And with me on the program this Tuesday morning, we've got the Shadow Employment Minister, Brendan O'Connor, and also the Parliamentary Secretary to the Treasurer, Steve Ciobo. Good morning, gentlemen. Steve Ciobo, first to you. As David reported there, very strong endorsement from Stephen Harper of the plan to scrap the carbon tax. Does it, as he points out, provide political cover before Mr Abbott heads to the White House, where the view is very different when it comes to the issue of carbon pricing?
Well, I'd make 2 points, Kieran. The first is that, one, we don't need political cover, and the reason being because we took a clear plan to get rid of this job-destroying carbon tax to the Australian people. The Australian people came on board, they provided us support, they want the world's biggest carbon tax gone. We're trying to do that. Labor is blocking us in our attempts to do that. And the second point is just to pull you up when you say that the White House has a very different point of view. I don't think that's the case at all. I think that the plan that the United States President outlined, although to be implemented by the states, the plan focuses on direct action to reduce emissions, similar to what we're doing with our emissions reduction fund.
Well, that is open to debate, and we'll get to the specifics of that in a moment. But Brendan O'Connor, what we do know, and was very clear from Stephen Harper and very public, was a strong backing of Tony Abbott on this issue from a world leader, from a very close ally.
Well, unlike the Australian government, the Canadian government, of course, is looking at reducing emissions in a way that's so much different from this supposed direct action plan of the Prime Minister's. We have, for example, an emission trading scheme launched in Quebec. We have far more serious attention to reducing emissions. And of course, it's clear that the world is embracing emission trading schemes. There are 6 regional emission trading schemes in China, a 7th coming on board. We have, of course, the world turning towards, not against emission trading schemes. However, the Australian governments are running away from a serious response to tackling climate change. And I think that's where the fundamental difference is. The Canadian Prime Minister can be as polite as he likes, but this, our Prime Minister, I mean, what imagined country in the world is actually taking this direct action approach to tackling climate change? Canada? I don't think so. The fact is...
You're starting to rant, Brendan. You're starting to rant.
I think so. I think the problem is, Kieran, that we're not seeing any effort by this government to seriously tackle a very important issue.
Steve Ciobo, I want to put to you, well, you suggested that the US approach is similar to direct action, but isn't the whole point that Obama is introducing very strong regulation to then have the states have to impose market mechanisms to meet the reductions in power plant emissions? Isn't that the point? He wanted an emissions trading scheme but couldn't get it through the Congress.
Well, you know, Kieran, I think there's 2 points to be made here. The first is that if you want me to speak about what's happening in the United States, I'm certainly happy to do that. But to me, the more important issue, and the one that I and the government are focused on, is our clear mandate from the Australian people. I mean, the Australian people could not have been more plain speaking at the last federal election when they overwhelmingly gave us a mandate to get rid of the world's biggest carbon tax. I mean, I want to stress that point because, you know, Brendan and the Labor Party will run all around the world and they'll say, but hang on, you know, the French are doing this and the people of Belgium are doing that and so on and so forth. But let's be clear about what we were elected to do here in Australia. Now, in relation to the United States, to go specifically to your question, the fact is that each state will make a determination about how they think they can best achieve the reductions in CO2 emissions similar to what we're doing in Australia. And the key point is this: we have an emissions reduction fund, $1 billion emissions reductions fund, and we will see a lot of that similar action undertaken in the United States. So no, I don't think that they're different at all.
Okay, Brendan O'Connor,
Kieran,
your
Kieran,
response to the fact that what was a very clear mandate, we are going over a bit of history here, but it's relevant to the week, and that is, even though the Prime Minister might have some difficulties or, you know, differences of opinion personally with the President, the fact is both nations are taking action and are committed to reducing emissions. That's the bottom line, isn't it?
And the Labor opposition is committed to pricing carbon. And in fact, if you look at the President of the United States...
You also said you're going to terminate the carbon tax, though. That's what you said in the campaign, very publicly.
What is there in its stead, Kieran? I mean, this is a veiled attempt to respond to to climate change, but the fact is this government has not a plan that will efficiently reduce the carbon emissions. I mean, every municipality in this country has some plan to reduce emissions, and yet we don't even see our national government respond effectively to this challenge. And I think until we see that, of course, it's very difficult to engage with this government seriously on this matter.
All right. Steve Ciobo, this suggestion, the angle being taken by various Fairfax papers that the Prime Minister is seeking a conservative alliance among like-minded countries to undermine any efforts to establish carbon pricing or emissions trading. What do you make of that? Is that a fair enough characterisation of what we've seen the last couple of days?
No, what I think it is complete rubbish, Kieran. What's going on here is that the Prime Minister is standing up for Australia's national interest. The Coalition is focused on Australia's national interest. What we want to do is make sure that we create the right business conditions to keep generating jobs. We want to make sure that we have more Australians in employment, and we also, through our emissions reduction fund, want to make sure that we bring down CO2 emissions in accordance with our policy of direct action. And guess what? Our reduction in CO2 emissions is exactly the same as Labor's reduction in CO2 emissions. So that's the first point. But the second point is this. Through our approach, we are not going to see jobs destroyed and jobs exported to foreign producers as would have happened under Labor's approach. So, hysteria from certain elements that the Prime Minister is running around trying to, erode an emissions trading scheme or something like that, that's just wrong. Our point has always been that we believe in, one, taking action against man-made climate change, and two, undertaking it in a way that protects Australia's national interests and, importantly, also makes sure that Australians are not thrown onto the unemployment scrap heap.
What do you make of the argument of Stephen Harper, Brendan O'Connor in Canada, where he says that every country will only adopt a policy to reduce emissions that won't clobber or cost jobs and growth in their economies? What do you make of that assessment of the Canadian Prime Minister?
Of course he's right to suggest that any government worth their salt will have regard to the economic impact. But let's be clear here, that's one of the reasons why you need to price carbon, so that you can indeed grow your economy, so you can indeed invest in the new jobs that are going to emerge as a result of the world changing in response to this global challenge. And if you turn your back on the science, and if you turn your back on the opportunities that will arise, you'll be left waiting at the station as the other developed nations have moved on. And I think that's the key here. You have to embrace this response to create the opportunities for jobs of the future. What we see is, though, if you have a Prime Minister who's a flat earther, well, it's very hard to embrace this notion.
Let's take a quick break. Back in just a moment with Brendan O'Connor and Steve Ciobo. Thanks for your company on AM Agenda. The Royal Commission into Union Governance and Corruption continues today in Sydney. Our reporter Laura Jays is standing by to give us a preview. Laura, good morning. And there will be a fair bit of focus on those much publicised renovations on Julia Gillard's Melbourne home back in the 90s.
Yeah, that's right, Kieran. This will be really the focus of the entire week. As you mentioned, the Royal Commission looking into union corruption did start sitting in May. It resumes this week in Sydney, and that will be the focus. Now, there's been a much publicised allegations around the AW slush fund scandal, particularly set up by the WA branch. And we heard in the previous weeks at this Royal Commission, Ralph Blewett, one of the key players here, saying that he saw, or at least knows of, $7,000 that was handed over in cash for work at Julia Gillard's house. He admits that Julia Gillard was in another room, but what we will hear this week is evidence from key players, builders, including Athol James. He'll give evidence. Ian Cambridge, a former AW National Secretary, the former AW President Robert Kernahan, and also a former senior executive at Thiess. But it's Athol James that will be some of the most interesting testimony we hear. It's been revealed that he has given really quite key documents to the Royal Commission, including invoices, bank accounts and notes related to work at Julia Gillard's house. Now, Julia Gillard, during her time as Prime Minister, always strenuously denied any wrongdoing, any knowledge of any wrongdoing at her house. And look, she stood up, conducted numerous media conferences where she took question after question, and she has always pointed that out. But it's no doubt, Kieran, that the focus of this week and the number of witnesses and that have been listed here, well, that is exactly what they're looking into. The slush fund, particularly out of WA, where it was set up and where the money was funneled into.
Laura, thank you. We'll chat to you soon. Back now to Steve Ciobo and Brendan O'Connor. Brendan O'Connor, first to you. What's at stake in this testimony and the hearings this week?
Well, we've said from the beginning that the Royal Commission that's been set up here is nothing more than a witch hunt, using taxpayers' money to take on what the government perceives to be its political opponents, and of course is being used as a great distraction from the focus on trying to sell the budget, which of course the Australian people do not support. I mean, there are far more important things to be dealing with than a he said, she said matter that might have happened almost a quarter of a century ago. But of course, Kieran, that doesn't stop this government spending taxpayers' money in this manner.
Steve Ciobo.
Well, Kieran, I mean, I think it's a shame that a senior Labor frontbencher would be so dismissive of cash payments being made, potentially corrupt activities between unions.
Alleged to have been made.
I'm not making the allegations, Brendan. The reality is that these are allegations that have been put forward by so-called whistleblowers within the union movement. We've got further revelations reported in media today about another $5,000 cash payment being made. I mean, I certainly don't think it's appropriate, although it perhaps is not surprising that a senior Labor frontbencher would be simply dismissing this and saying there's nothing to see here, let's move the show on. But can I say from a government perspective, Kieran, our focus absolutely is upon the tough choices that need to be made, the hard decisions that need to be taken to make sure that Australia starts to live within its means. After the Labor Party left us borrowing $1 billion a month just to pay the interest on the debt that Labor accumulated, we've got a clear job ahead of us. It's going to require some heavy lifting, and we're focused on doing that.
All right, just a quick one to wrap that up. Brendan O'Connor, are you making light of some serious allegations, as Mr Ciobo asserts there?
No, I'm not making light of allegations, and as I've said from the beginning, if there are allegations about any criminal misconduct or impropriety, then those matters should be referred to the police and the Australian Crime Commission. We have a standing commission, Kieran. We don't need a show trial, and so any serious allegation, of course, should be referred to the police. This money, however, is being spent on lawyers buying lobster rather than police who want to fight crime. That's why I'm concerned about the means by which we look at these issues.
Well, Steve Ciobo, just quickly and finally on this issue to you, there are standing authorities, the Crime Commission and others, that could look into this if it warranted it.
Well, you know, Kieran, I'd be prepared to take Labor a little more seriously if they hadn't hacked 45% out of the budget of the Australian Federal Police.
That's untrue.
You know, the problem that we have is that Labor ripped funding out of Federal Police funding. They ripped the numbers out of Federal Police officers, and they did it because they left us in such a bad financial situation.
You're completely wrong, Steve. You don't know what you're talking about.
Look, we're going to have to move on to the. We're going to have to move on. We've got another issue I do want to get to on the paper and leave scheme. Steve Ciobo, it looks like this could be embarrassing for the Prime Minister if it's blocked by his own side. 3 Nats, 3 Liberals, according to the Australian today, ready to cross the floor, and the Prime Minister's been advised as such, according to the Australian reports this morning.
Well, Kieran, let's be clear about the Coalition's paid parental leave scheme. The first point is that we've taken this policy to the last 2 federal elections. The second point is this. If Australians are able to be paid real wages, i.e. their actual salary when they take long service leave, if they're able to be paid their actual salary when they take sick leave, if they're able to be paid their actual salary when they take holiday leave, well, why shouldn't they be able to be paid their actual salary when they take maternity leave or paternity leave? I mean, we actually think that this is a good policy. We've taken it 2 elections. We've got endorsement from the Australian people.
You haven't convinced your colleagues, though. That's the problem, isn't it? Because a number of them are going to block it by the looks of it.
Well, I'm not getting too worked up about media speculation in this respect, Kieran. From my perspective, this is a straightforward policy. It's got endorsement. It's a policy that actually empowers mothers in Australia. It sees the replacement of the real wages plus superannuation, and it's a far better policy than what Labor's put forward on the table.
Well, Brendan O'Connor, you'd be welcoming the support of obviously coalition MPs crossing the floor to the Labor side to block this. But do you worry that this could end up backfiring on you because of the fact that this is obviously a more generous scheme?
No, I'm not surprised that the government members are looking to mutiny on this matter. I mean, the amount of money that's going to be spent on this paid parental leave for millionaires could have paid for the medical research fund, so we wouldn't have needed to even suggest a tax on doctor visits, a tax on medicines that's been proposed within the budget. This is a government of wrong priorities, and this is a clear example where they've got it wrong and their own side are mutinying.
Steve Ciobo, could it be a situation where it's a blessing in disguise for yourself, for Treasurer Hockey and others who are trying to make the numbers add up? If the opposition is blocking a number of other savings measures, if this doesn't go ahead, it would be a blessing in disguise, would it not, in terms of trying to make the books add up?
Well, no, Kieran, if we want to make the books add up, what we need for Labor to do is to get out of the way. I mean, Labor has the completely absurd situation now, Kieran, where Labor are blocking $20 billion of savings in the Senate. But the most extraordinary thing about this is out of that $20 billion of savings that they're blocking, $5 billion of them are actually Labor's announced savings. So Labor announced them.
Levy would cover all of that,
the $20 billion that Steve refers to is exactly the amount that's required over 4 years to pay for the paid parental leave, isn't it?
So that would be a blessing in disguise, Steve Ciobo.
No, that's not the case at all. We have a policy that's going to empower Australian parents. And let's also take note of this point, Kieran. Labor's big about talking about global action. Labor's very big about looking at what other countries are doing. Our policy is simply bringing Australia onto a level playing field with what tens of countries around the world already do. So why does Labor want one policy when it comes to climate change, but they actually want to rip money out of the hands of Australian parents?
Gents, we're out of time. Steve Ciobo, Brendan O'Connor, have a good day. Appreciate it. A quick break on AIM Agenda. Back in just a moment.